Under the arms like this. Go pop switch. We go behind the back. Remember that we got a stretch in the morning. Very good. Then we go nice and high. Okay? Nice and high. Little spins, little spins. Double spin.
Fringe is unique,
powerful,
exciting,
an adventure.
I think it's people coming together.
It allows everybody and anybody to have a go.
Even some shows you'll come across and you'll be like, I did not even know there was a market for that show.
The arts have always been there, particularly theatre has always been there for me at the difficult times.
I always have that desire of being a performer, but you're deaf. How are you going to be able to do that?
How can you direct as a blind person?
I simply can't get into the venue.
I've got to look at it, almost assume that I can't get in.
Spontaneity is very difficult within the Fringe.
They had a disabled toilet that was down 2 flights of stairs.
The interpreter is normally put on one side of the stage. I feel like I'm watching a bit of a tennis match.
When I experience these barriers, it makes me feel sad.
Frustrated.
Uneasy.
Deflating.
But sadly not surprised.
Accessibility, it can become part of the artistic process.
It's trying to bridge the gap between the two different worlds, the hearing and the deaf worlds.
What would happen if there was a blind Hamlet or a King Lear who was deaf?
Talk to us, let us know what you already have, and we'll let you know what we need, and we can hopefully meet somewhere in the middle.
I'm Michelle, I'm a producer. I have limited mobility and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Leah, I'm a stand-up comedian, I'm deaf, and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Alison, I'm a director, I'm blind, and it's my Fringe too.
I'm Neil, I'm a musician, I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and it's my Fringe too.
Everyone
has the right
to experience
live performance.
Fringe stands for freedom. The freedom to take part, making a start, telling your story, whoever you are. It's for the risk takers, rule breakers, name makers, artists and audience alike, a place to discover and to be discovered. It's an international showcase, meeting place, creative space where anything goes and the world comes to find it. A global stage made in Scotland. An idea so nonsensical no one could explain it. Copy, own, predict or contain it. A complex design with human heart, ever changing and state of the art. The Fringe is groundbreaking, mischief-making, shaping conversations but never taking itself too seriously. Its birth was an act of defiance and it will never be shushed. It begins and ends with Edinburgh. It closes in taverns, venues in caverns, and waiting in line for a show. That feeling of belonging in a crowd of perfect strangers. The Fringe that calls Edinburgh home.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the next episode in our FringeCast series. We're going to be talking about how to bring a show to the Fringe in the broadest possible terms. I guess as always, it's best to start by introducing ourselves. So, hi everyone, my name's Alan. I'm the registration manager here at the Fringe Society.
My name is Katie. I'm the Artist Development Manager.
And hi, I'm Daniel. I'm the Digital Marketing Coordinator. And for today's episode, we're also joined by Leah, who's slightly out of shot, there you go, who's dealing with all the tech for today.
She's not allowed a microphone yet, so very...
We keep her off cam.
Yeah. Thank you, Leah. Great. So, Daniel, you're our technical man. Explain to people how this session can work and how they can get in touch, because we really like it when people engage with us. That's when these work best.
So we're going to assume you're watching this episode live. You can indeed watch this back on YouTube at any point. But if you are watching live, the way these sessions work best, like Alan says, is when you guys get in touch. So if you're watching on YouTube, somewhere around the screen, there should be a live chat box or a live chat button. And what we'd love you to do is, as we're going along, just submit your questions, either based on what we're talking about, or maybe just any question you have about bringing a show to the Fringe, and we'll try and cover it, or at least point you in the direction of where you might be able to find the answer. These episodes are recorded as we go, so you can watch it back. You can also rewind it, but we do recommend sticking with us live, just so we're all in sync and everything makes sense.
And you're also going to give us a nice technical run through of what to expect today, so as people know to hold off their question if it's about...
Ask us questions, but don't ask us questions.
We'd love to hear from you, but please at the appropriate time.
So today we have a lot to cover, given we are talking about how to get started. We try and do this in under an hour, so it may be a little optimistic.
I'm sorry, guys. I did that outline. I did not realise it would look that extensive.
So we're going to do a whistle-stop tour, stopping off at the basics of who the Fringe Society is and who we are, asking the question why you're coming to the Fringe and what are your goals. And actually some of that is covered in a lot more depth in our last episode, episode 1, which is all about answering that question, should you do a show at the Fringe, and if 2020 is the right year for you? And then looking further ahead, we've got the timeline, so the sort of rough dates. We need to think about certain aspects and what you need to get in place. Moving on to the more technical nitty-gritty things like the rights, your rights, legal considerations, and all the fun things you have to get in place before bringing your show forward. We'll look at choosing your venue, budgeting your show, registering your show, and then finally wrapping up with thinking about the ways you can make the most of your time once you're in Edinburgh and at the Fringe.
Yeah, and I think as a small disclaimer on that, that's a lot to get through, as Daniel said. So, like, almost a disclaimer of we're going to be touching lightly on things, aren't we, Katie?
Yeah, exactly. It's very much just a kind of introduction to all of these topics. A lot of these topics will have their own episodes at a later date, so we won't be going into too much depth on anything. But if you do have any questions about things, please pop them into the comments
Yeah.
And on those topics, before Christmas, so before the end of this year, 2 of those topics, indeed, one is going to be our next episode. Episode 3 is all about what venues are looking for and how to find one. We also got an episode about budgeting a show, and then we also got a special episode, which is looking at some of the considerations and things you have to bear in mind if you're bringing a show from overseas to Edinburgh.
Great.
Yeah, and I think the value in today is really just hopefully we are asking those questions or giving you those little markers that just kind of nudge you into your research in the right direction, or to ask those questions that you want to ask before maybe you approach a venue or before you make any concrete decisions.
Yeah.
I also wanted to take this moment to welcome everyone who's tuned in. We've had people from all over the world today, as ever. So if you're not sure what to post in the live chat, just kick off by telling us where you're tuning in from. We've been joined today so far by people from Denmark, New York, Sheffield and Washington, D.C., but I'm sure there's more of you out there, so do let us know.
Denmark's nice. We're not in Denmark for a while.
I don't think, not well. We have a lot.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Should we get started then?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. We start as always by talking about us, the Fringe Society, and the reason we do that is just because it's a really important context to understand who we are and what our remit is, because it affects how you bring a show to the Fringe. So we're the Fringe Society. We are a charity that underpins the Fringe. We support the Fringe happening. We don't so much manage or run it. The Fringe isn't something that someone is in charge of. You'll hear the word open access a lot, which basically means no one programs the Fringe. Anyone with a story to tell and a venue to tell it in can come and be a part of the Fringe. And with that means there's a lot of self-producing that goes on, and it means there's a lot of decisions you're probably going to have to make on your own. But what we do have is a really clear remit about supporting artists to bring work to the Fringe and to make the most of their time here, which Katie, you look after a lot of.
Yeah, so that's kind of where these FringeCasts come in. One of the biggest remits of the Fringe Society is supporting artists in their journey to the Fringe, at the Fringe and beyond the Fringe. A lot of that comes in advance from now upwards, giving you all of the information, tools and resources that you need to make the best decisions going forward in your journey to bringing a show to the Fringe. While you're here, we offer an awful lot of support for making the most of your time here, be that engaging with the media, engaging with the industry, getting bums on seats, and making sure that you're taking care of all of your goals, which we will talk about a lot over the next few episodes. And then helping people advance themselves beyond the Fringe as well. So anyone that's been here can get back in touch with us and ask for our support in those next steps after the Fringe as well.
And our role is kind of best, it's a bit unusual, but it's best sort of explained by the history of the Fringe very briefly, that it's over 70 years old. It started in 1947, where artists just started bringing shows. And then you got to the late 50s. So in 1958, some of these artists got together and said, okay, let's make sense of this. And they formed a committee, which over time has evolved into a one-person charity. And now the team of 30, based in a dungeon in a basement in Edinburgh today, who are here to help.
Beautifully decorated.
Where we put the logo slightly off centre, completely on purpose.
Yeah. So yeah, as you said, it was started by artists, and so the main thing that we do is supporting those artists every year that come to the Fringe and make it what it is today.
So it's not for us to accept applications or to tell anyone they're allowed or not allowed to perform. It's about supporting that happening and facilitating that. So we do things like we run our box office to help people, to help ticket the whole Fringe, but also we have a marketing team which Daniel is a part of and Lee is a part of, which helps promote the festival. So it's hopefully there's as many available bums to put on the seats.
Yeah.
Never said that before. That's fun.
Let's never say it again.
So cool. That's us, and that's what we're here to do, and that's how to link it to this episode. Really, that's the thing you need to be thinking about, because it's not the kind of thing that you're going to apply and we're going to be like, great, here's this perfect checklist that we need you to go and do. It's a lot of it is going to be you going out there and making things happen.
Another aspect as well is the sheer variety of work that comes to the Fringe, from comedy, theatre, dance, spoken word. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. There isn't the perfect handbook to bring a show, because every show is unique, and almost every genre you can imagine is covered somewhere in that programme.
Yeah.
Wow, we do a lot. Katie, you mentioned, I'm going to do a lovely segue. You mentioned
gorgeous.
goals.
Yes.
And I know we talked about this in the previous episode, which is available to listen to if you haven't already. But I think it's really important that we reiterate establishing why you're doing the Fringe and what you want out of it before anything else.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we hammer home most often when we're speaking to artists that are considering coming to the Fringe is that you really, really should be sure about why you're coming here. You can't come here just in a kind of, as you said, checklist capacity where it's one size fits all. You should be very clear from the very, very start about why you're coming, and that will inform every single decision you make along the way. So, for example, one of the goals could be that you're trying to get your company more recognition and more well-known amongst the media and the press, so that you have a better reputation for your work going forward. And then, you should have a very clear understanding of how you want to market your show and what media outlets you want to speak to and what venue you should go to that has those right connections in the media or the press. Another goal could be that you're wanting to tour your show after the Fringe, and if that's the case, you should be looking at shows that have come here before that are similar to your own, that have gone on to tour afterwards, what venue they went to and who they spoke to while they were here, what venues they're touring to after the Fringe. One of the goals that some people have is making a profit at the Fringe. I will say that is a very difficult thing to do, and a lot of the time it can even be difficult to break even, so being very clear about your financial stability before coming to the Fringe. And as you said, we will be covering a little bit about budgets later on. Other ones could just be you want to come to the Fringe, you've always wanted to come to the Fringe, you just want to have a good time, you want to meet fun people, you want to perform at the biggest arts festival in the world, and that's a completely legitimate reason to come to the Fringe as well. But being very clear on what those reasons are, because that will inform which venue you go for, what your budget needs to look like, how long you're coming here for, if you're only coming here for a short time, which end of the Fringe you're coming here. So it's a really, really important thing to get those goals defined now.
And we cover all that in the detail in the last episode, which is available both on YouTube and as a podcast. So if you want to find out more about how to listen to that, just go to edfringe.com/FringeCast, and you can find out where to get it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you have you pick your podcasts, you can find it there.
I'd say just like a top tip on that, like really highlighting something Katie said, is like do your research. Like this year's program, the 2019 program, is such a valuable resource for you doing a show in 2020. So the PDF of that sits on our website. But also until the first release of shows in 2020, which is at the end of January, they're still on there on the Ed Fringe website, which means they're really easy to like filter and look through. So if you're going to do some research on like, I want to look at theatre shows that were in this venue, you've got that resource for another like sort of 2 or 3 months. And I'd say it's a really good thing to take advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. And also getting in touch with those shows that have been here before and sharing that knowledge is a really, really great place to start. Once
artists have done the Fringe, they love giving back.
Love to share.
They really do. We've got a couple who have done interviews with us actually, who we'll hear from today.
And I can't believe we got this far into an episode without Alan mentioning that he did want to bring a show himself.
Don't wake the beast.
Guys, I may have done 1 or 2. So now moving on to timeline, I think is probably the next thing that we get a lot of questions on. That people are like, what should I be doing when? And as with most of the things we talk about, there aren't necessarily specifics. Apart from the very specific deadlines, there's not a specific, you need to have this done by that time. It is very fluid, but I'd say that there is a general kind of thing of what you should be doing at different times of the year. So in this sort of time, the latter half of the year, so in November, December, I'd say research is a huge thing to be doing now. Answering those questions that you've sort of had niggling, asking the right questions that maybe you want answered, and a lot of people are really kind of starting to choose their venue now. People choose their venues right up until the deadline for registration, and then sometimes beyond. But a lot of people, if you're talking about like an ideal timeline, would you agree, Katie? I think like latter half of the year, sort of very early next year is a good time to be doing that.
Yeah, generally, and getting in touch with venues early on, so you know kind of what their programming remit is, if they're a programming venue, or if they're to make sure that you have the right amount and the right negotiation timeline to go through for the next few months.
I think the more sort of far in advance you get, the more time you're giving yourself, because venues are really busy and they're getting lots of people apply, so they're going to need time to take your application sort of into consideration if they're a venue that programs. So actually giving yourself that time so you're not like immediately chasing up with people.
And it's worth saying that if you're watching this live or listening to it in November or December, you're already ahead of the game in some respects. So you've already made a great start by starting to do that research and thinking about some of the questions you need to answer before getting started.
Yeah, and then down the timeline, I guess some of those more rigid dates we talked about. Registration opens on the 6th of January. Very exciting day. Cannot wait. First day back after Christmas, open registration. And then we have the 11th of March, which is, we'll talk more about this at the end of this podcast, but that's what we call the discount deadline. So you can save a bit of money if you're doing a full run, if you're fully registered with us by the 11th of March, 5 p.m. And then the final date that you can register with the Fringe Society and be included in the printed Fringe programme is the 8th of April at 5 p.m.
But what if someone wants to register after that? Can they still come to the Fringe?
Yep, you can still come to the Fringe. We basically reopen registration once we've managed to fully proof and get the programme off to the printer. We then reopen it right at the end of May for shows to have a web-only listing ahead of the programme being released to the world on the 10th of June.
Amazing.
I think that's the key dates, apart from the Fringe itself.
Which is?
Oh, now you're testing.
The 7th to the,
To the
31st of August
And
this year.
all those dates,
But the hardest ones to remember.
all those dates are listed on the Take Part of the Ed Fringe website, which I hope you've seen by listening to this. And if you go to the registration sections, it breaks down those dates and how that process works.
Yeah.
Great.
I would also say, because we haven't plugged them yet, and that's unusual, there's an email that I think it's really important you have if you're considering bringing a show to the Fringe, and it's participants@edfringe.com. And basically that goes to our team, and they're just very good at, like, basically they can answer pretty much anything.
Yeah, and if they can't answer your question, they know the person that can, so they'll point you in the right direction of those that will be able to answer it.
Totally. So as much as we'd love and fully encourage you to ask us questions today, if you've got something that's really, really specific, like I need this type of venue that has this type of equipment, then that's absolutely the type of email that if you fire it to participants@edfringe.com, they can point you in the right direction.
Perfect.
Great.
And that's the timeline covered pretty much in depth.
Tech. We're now going on to something really exciting, Katie.
Oh, my favourite topic.
Can you talk about rights and legal issues?
Yes.
Legalities?
Maybe-ish.
Legal issues feels quite severe.
I am absolutely not an expert on these topics, but my team members at that participants@edfringe.com email address are. So I will touch on them very briefly right now, but if you have any in-depth questions on that, you can find all of this information on our website, which is the edfringe.com/take-part that Daniel just mentioned, or you can email our participants team at participants@edfringe.com. But I would say that in advance of coming to the Fringe, you should be very, very clear on what you have permissions to perform here. As Alan already said, it's an open access festival. Anyone can perform here with any show once they have the permissions to do so. So make sure that if it's a show that was written by somebody else, make sure that you have the rights to perform that play. You might have performed it elsewhere and have secured the rights to, say, perform it in your own hometown, but you might need to reapply for the rights if you're wanting to bring it on tour or bring it to the Fringe.
One that some people get caught up on.
Yeah, absolutely. And rights might be different for people performing it in an amateur or student group to somebody performing it professionally. So be very, very clear on whether you have rights. Another thing is insurance. I believe it is public liability insurance.
Which is a sore topic
which is
with
the
me.
most important thing you should be thinking about when coming. It's kind of one of the things that a lot of people forget to think about.
A lot of your venues will actually require it.
Yeah.
My first show, I may have forgotten to do it until quite late on. So
Surprising.
don't do an Alan.
Don't
Please be
do it.
prepared. And it's lucky I had a contingency in my budget.
And isn't it that insurance basically covers the fact that once the house lights go down, the audience is your responsibility, and that insures you for that.
Yeah, there becomes a point when the house is delivered over to the show, their insurance stops and yours starts.
Yeah, so you're basically in control of that space once the venue has handed that over to you. So being very clear that if anything happens in that space or to an audience member while your show is happening, it's on you. So get that public liability insurance.
Don't just assume your show is really safe and nothing's going to go wrong.
Our show's fully safe. We've just got a confetti cannon
Oh.
that fires into the audience.
Oh God, don't do that. But do ensure that it's biodegradable confetti if you do. The other thing is visa considerations if you're coming from abroad, and we, as Daniel covered, we will be doing a special international episode later on this year. But being very clear on what your visa requirements are. It is a permit-free festival, which means that you do not need a work permit to perform here, but you might still need a visa if you're visiting the UK anyway. There's a lot of other kind of technical and insurance-y rights and legal issues. That's the technical term.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that I think is really important to consider in this area is code of conduct, and ensuring that you are reading the codes of conduct that we have on our website to ensure that you're performing in the best of your abilities at the Fringe, making sure that you know your rights, you know your responsibilities. If you're hiring people or if you're using volunteers, making sure that you have all of those policies in place that you need when you're doing that. The other things I think are being very clear on your considerations of the environment if you're coming to the Fringe. Absolutely. And obviously that's a hot topic at the moment, but you can inadvertently have quite a large carbon footprint in coming to the Fringe, so being sure to take measures to decrease that or be as sustainable as you possibly can when coming here is really, really important.
And it's one of those things you want to think about at this. Same with all these legal things, it can be intimidating. It's something you want to put off, but actually once you get into it, they're often quite straightforward. And they're not so scary. And specifically when it comes to accessibility or sustainability, the earlier you can think about that and factor that into your plans, the easier it is.
And factor it into your budget as well, because a lot of the time you don't think about it at this stage. It doesn't make it into your budget, and it becomes kind of an added bonus if you have money for it at the end. But actually it should really take the kind of heart of your project at the moment while it's being developed.
And do you know what? That also ties into, like, if you're talking to venues and making sort of legal agreements with them and contracts, even if you feel a bit awkward about asking a particular question, or you're like, oh, this feels like I'm not used to this, it is honestly so much better having that conversation like in January, February, where everyone has a bit more headspace, than suddenly arriving in August with all the pressure of the Fringe and being like, hang on, I thought I had a technician. Why is there no technician here? And
never, ever be scared to ask a question that you think might be a stupid or weird question of your venue. Yeah. Trust me, they have heard it before.
And I think, honestly, one of the worst mistakes you could make is assuming something. Just being like, oh, I've rented a theatre back home before and I got X, Y, and Z. Like, of course I get a front of house manager.
And oftentimes the theatres up at the Fringe aren't theatres year round. A lot of them are, pubs, restaurants, university buildings, other venues, churches. So never assume that they will have all of the equipment that your venue back home might have.
One of the main things we discussed in our last episode is when you get to August and you're performing your show, you want that to be your primary and only focus. You don't want to be worrying about legal issues or any of these technical aspects. The more of that you can get out of the way earlier, the better your show will be. And that's the most important thing.
For sure.
Giving yourself the headspace to focus on your show. It's a very important.
Because if you've never been to the Fringe in August, you need as much headspace as possible.
Yeah. So do we all. So that leads us quite nicely on to discussing, I think, what's probably going to be the meat of this episode. It's what a lot of people are asking at this stage. I don't know if any questions have started yet, Daniel, or if people have been waiting patiently, but it is sort of, how do you choose a venue? Like, how do you even start making that decision?
And it is worth flagging this again. This is an introduction, and our next episode, episode 3, is all about what venues are looking for and how to find one. So don't worry if we don't go into maximum depth, but please feel free to ask your questions about this, and we'll do our best at this stage.
Yeah, so I would say one of the first things to decide is what model you think would work well for you. So there are a couple models on the Fringe. The first being a standard straight hire, which is very much what's in the tin. You pay a fee, you've then got the venue, then all your tickets and things are your own. There's then a box office split, which there are different versions of, one with a guarantee and things, but that basically means that your deal is subject to how many tickets are sold and percentages and breakdowns and stuff, which can be more stressful in August, but also mean that your venue can be more invested in how the show performs. And then there's also variations on our free models, which some shows it's free to get the venue, and then the tickets are also, the show is also free, non-ticketed.
Where people pay sort of a donation at the end, typically.
Where you do like a bucket speech. And then there's a sort of in-between one, which is a ticketed model, but that you can opt to buy a ticket in advance to sort of reserve a seat at that show, and then still make a donation later. Or just turn up without a ticket, and if there's available seats, you can get in to then make your donation at the end of the show. That's the fastest I have ever done that.
Honestly, I'm so impressed. Normally, Alan goes on for at least 20 minutes on that section.
On just a straight
I think
hire.
You'll hear all of that in the next episode, so do buckle in for that.
Yeah, I think, well, that was also to get on to some of the other sort of main things to think about in a venue. And I think when you're at the stage of choosing, something that we always reiterate, but also the venues themselves reiterate, is talk to as many as you can. Don't
definitely.
just use our tools, find one and be like, I like them, I'm going there, without having tested sort of what everyone else is offering and whether it fits. We normally advise, like, talk to like between 7 and 10 is a really good one. And I mean, this kind of goes along with being a nice person, but please don't ever try and play venues off against one another, because we always say this, the Fringe is massive, but it's also tiny.
Yeah.
Like
It's a really close-knit community.
Yeah. Like, venues are like, by and large, most of them are friends with each other, and like they have WhatsApp groups the same way as we do, to be like, oh, is this person really talking to you? Like, it's not about playing them off against one another. It's about being like honest. In choosing a venue, you're starting probably your most important relationship in the Fringe.
Yeah.
It's going to be like your home away from home. You want that relationship to work for you, and your venue is someone who is really busy and working really hard throughout the Fringe, so you want that relationship to work.
Yeah, and it's absolutely normal, and they will expect you to be having conversations with more than one. They, in fact, would rather you have conversations with more than one venue, because then you understand the different levels of support that are offered, the different levels of finances that are involved, the different relationships and systems and models across the Fringe.
Yeah.
And it comes back to that the idea of what is your goal? Why are you bringing a show to the Fringe? And again, back to that research that you mentioned earlier, Alan, of what other shows have been here, what shows are similar to your own, what has done well in what venue, being very clear on the types of shows that exist within
And
venues.
maybe ask them, because obviously different venues can sort of change over the years, so maybe making sure you know what their plans are. So if this space is going to be really comedy focused and you're bringing a theatre show, trying to work out whether that is the right space for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually got a clip to play as part of this episode from comedian Rob Kemp, who Daniel and I sat down and spoke with in August. And it's him talking really well about like researching venues and the work done now that can help sort of some angst down the line. So I'm going to let Rob speak for himself.
Don't underestimate the significance of the space that you're working in, and do consider it. Like when you get an offer, do look at the map of Edinburgh, do find out where it is, because you might think, oh, I'm going to be there, but then you actually find out you're kind of on the outskirts of where it all is, and then so you're not going to get a lot of footfall, so that you're going to have to work really hard flyering or having a flyering team to get anybody to come over this way. Sometimes you'll drop lucky because you'll be in a distant space, and then there'll be someone with a higher profile on before you or after you, so people will be arriving to be there in advance. But often, no, it's real tough in those sort of outlying venues, and that will wear on you. That definitely.
Thank you, Rob. What I think he makes a really good point there is it's not about, if I'm not in a certain part of town, I'm doomed, but it's about researching and being aware of that. So knowing where your venue is in relation to some of the hubs around the Fringe is a really important thing. We often talk, I'm kind of put you on the spot here, Katie, but I've got the answers if you don't. We talk about a trio of criteria quite a lot.
Yes, we do. And the trio of criteria are, I believe, audience
Capacity, that is one.
so audience capacity, genre,
yes, programming types,
location.
Yes, all three. And a lot of, we've got, so there are venue search tools on edfringe.com/takepart that will help you kind of filter down by your criteria. But those are the three really important ones in finding a venue that's really going to sit well for you. And we keep referring back to that research aspect, but if you're like you're doing a theatre show, finding those shows that are similar to yours. So like, oh, we've got a dark experimental piece about mental health. Where were those shows this year? What venues were they in? How well did they do? Is there a hub of the Fringe that's like really focused in on that kind of programming? Because if you put that kind of show in a sort of comedy programmed venue,
probably not the audience that you're looking for.
But it's also worth noting that the vast majority of Fringe goers often buy tickets for their shows on the day or within the hour of the performance, and often make snap decisions. So if they go to a space and they know there are certain types of shows there, if you don't fit in that, you may not catch them in that moment when they're making a decision.
I know there's venues that I always like to make sure I go to every year, just because I like being in that venue and I've seen good stuff there. So I'm like, oh, I've not been to X yet. I'm not going to say it. I'm very impartial. But I'm like, oh, I've not been there yet. What show do I want to see there? And finding, like, knowing that, oh, if I go to X venue, I'm going to get a certain type of show.
Yeah, and I also think that point you made a while ago about location is really important. And a lot of people tend to focus around specific areas of the Fringe, but you must also realise that those areas of the Fringe have really, really high concentrations of, yes, audience, but also high concentrations of shows. Yeah. So there is more choice for audiences there. But actually what can be really, really exciting at the Fringe is when there's a really unusual or different or destination show that is outside of these hubs and exists in its own entity, slightly outside of those hubs, that can sometimes be really overwhelming for the audience and can sometimes be very crowded. So actually, if you have a show that's slightly different, slightly better suited to something that's a little bit more, a bit more obscure, a bit more outside of the general hubs, that can actually be really well suited. And I wouldn't try to shoehorn your way into something that isn't the right fit for you just because it's a centrally located area. Yeah,
totally. And the flip side of that is just being like, it's being aware of it. So if you're like, oh, I have the knowledge that I'm a little bit further out, there might not be as much footfall, so I'm going to do X, Y, and Z of my marketing to make up for that.
There's also a couple of considerations about location and the scale of the city of Edinburgh. And if you've not been here before and you're coming from London and New York, it is an incredibly compact city. The distances are quite short, but if you look at the map of Fringe venues, there are clusters, but ultimately there are over 300 different venues all over the city. And the reason I wanted to flag this as kind of an early one is often people see where the venues are and they think that's a huge distance. And they often want to start looking for accommodation in that space. Whereas actually you can go what looks like miles and miles away. It's actually a 10-minute walk. So it's really, really worth, when you go into Google Maps, just get a sense of scale, that Edinburgh is a compact city, and to bear that in mind.
Yeah, and you know what, a lot, like, talking about the Fringe Society team, most of us live, like, away from those central hubs, and it is a dream at the end of the day, being like, okay, if I have to wait for a bus to get there, or it's a longer walk, but when you get there and you sort of see the number of people starting to drop off and everything get a bit quieter, that is so...
But it's a factor when choosing. A lot of artists consider where they may be staying when choosing their venue, and it's worth just checking some journey times, because it will surprise you that some routes are really quick. Edinburgh has a really extensive bus network, but you can walk all over the place. And when picking a venue, your accommodation may be a factor, so it's worth just giving some thought about the distances and how long it takes to get around.
Although if you're an Edinburgh local, be aware that how long it normally takes to get somewhere may take slightly longer on the Fringe, just sheer to the lack of the
sheer number of people. And if you can catch videos of just how busy the streets of Edinburgh are during the Fringe, and that's worth bearing in mind if you're trying to lug large pieces of sets.
And so, I wanted to carry an armchair up the Scotsman steps. So anyone who knows what Scotsman steps are, that's quite a lot of steps, and I'm not a small...
There's more than 100 of them.
The last one of the trio then is capacity. And what a bit of advice we really like to say is, so if you're used to selling out 100-seater back home, great. That doesn't mean you should instinctively go for a 100-seater at the Fringe, because there's lots of people and there's a potential audience, but as we've said, there's also a huge amount of other shows. Competition is high. People won't have heard of you in the same way as your local audience. So a lot of people, even like sort of some established names, will go, okay, I normally do this many seats at home, I'm going to half that. A lot of people, when it's their first show, they look for those like 30, 40 seaters, and they go, do you know what, I would rather have small numbers but fuller than some of those big spaces.
Especially if you're doing what we call a full run, so you register for the length of the festival, which is over 20 days. So filling a 100-seater 20 times over, it's a huge challenge compared to a 200-seater for one night.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that actually you would find it quite difficult to find a venue or a space within a venue that has 100 seats. Generally, within the Fringe landscape, I would say the generic amount of seats would range from probably 20 to 60 as your general average. Anyone kind of in 100 plus seater tends to be somebody that's been to the Fringe before, has made a name for themselves, has shown their success and has sold out in the past. So I would say if you're coming for the first time, aim 20 to 40.
And it's part of the Fringe's appeal is the fact that it's you have quite a lot of it's quite intimate.
Yeah.
And consider that when creating your work, that actually you're playing to smaller audiences, and you can use that to your advantage.
Yeah, I also think capacity is sometimes a really good way. I know when I had my first show, I'm lucky I'm an Edinburgh resident, so it was a little bit easier to like imagine where things were. But one of the things that actually got it down from an overwhelming number of places to choose from was capacity. And speaking to a lot of shows over the years, when you take your tech requirements and then match that up to your capacity, that really helps you zero in on what you want. So I know a lot of like dance shows, for example, they really are looking for that bigger stage space, but with a smaller audience space. So that can sometimes be like, okay, I know I have this, which is maybe a bit of a unique setup, and that's suddenly taken it from a 300 down to actually these 10 that I really want to look into.
And I also think taking your deal into account when you're looking at your capacity should be a really important part of choosing that venue. So if you're going for a straight hire, for example, as you said earlier, you have bought the venue outright, and so the venue isn't maybe as invested as selling those tickets as they would be if it was a box office split, because they're not getting the income from those tickets. So perhaps going with a smaller capacity, but knowing that all of the money that's coming in is yours. Whereas if you're with the box office split, knowing that the venue is investing marketing support into getting bums on seats might mean that you should perhaps go for a bigger capacity, because you know that you have that equal weight with the venue to appeal to audiences.
So already, hopefully, you can see that all of those decisions you make all loop in and kind of interweave with one another.
Yeah, and it's totally different for every single show.
And with all those kind of decisions, we are here to be a sounding board. We are impartial, but if you just email us at participants@fringe.com going, I'm thinking about doing this is what I've offered, how would that work? While we won't say this is great and this is bad, we can still give you some advice and guidance on similar shows and experiences they've had and what's worked for them.
For sure.
Yeah, we're never gonna say go to this place is our favourite, but what we will say is like, oh, you've got this kind of dance piece, we know these venues do it. Oh, you also need a grand piano, we know these venues have that. We're very good at specifics.
The grand piano example comes up so often, but it's a classic case of research, because there have been shows that have turned up and just assumed there was a grand piano in the space.
No.
Which is quite a shock on day one.
I think realistically, you're probably not going to get a grand piano in a space, but fair play if you do. I think just before we move on, we should probably point to the areas of our website that have all of the information about venues, and the venue search tool and guide to choosing a venue are the most important two in that. So the venue search tool is an interactive tool that you can use on the website, where you input that trio of criteria, and it spits out results of venues that might be the right fit for your show. And the other is the Fringe Guide to Choosing a Venue, which is a massive
an absolutely mammoth document. And I've got to admit, I was very bad in my sustainability because I printed it out, but it was because how my brain worked. I needed to surround myself. What I should have done is picked my key 10 and printed just those pages. I realised that as the printing was happening. But if you're someone who actually is like, oh, I just need it all in front of me, then the PDF guide is actually a really good one, because it's got everything from stage specs to programming and stuff.
And all of the contact details for the venues are in those as well. So you can find everything in there.
And to find that, you just go to edfringe.com, hit the take part button, and under there there's a putting on a show guide. And there's even some hyperlinks through to the venue search tool straight away.
Nice.
And in there there's a whole section about finding a venue, which covers pretty much all we just discussed.
I think one last thing, because I think we haven't mentioned, is so that some venues, it's important to know how they would like to be contacted, as Katie said, because some of them it will just be an email, and some of them it will be a actual application process. So as much as the Fringe is open access, some venues will program their work around what they want to curate.
Yeah.
We had a question that came in just to clarify that in that PDF document, so the full listing does include the stage specs. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm pretty well. Back
I
in my
think
day,
for some of
it's what the venue gives us. So some venues may be like, oh, these are our stage specs.
And in all those cases, they may be there, but it's worth just saying, I've seen those specs. Is that something you're offering this year? Would that suit? It's about having those conversations. And that advice you said at the top, talking to approximately 7 to 10 different venues and being honest about what you need.
Yeah, or being honest about what you need is so important. Like, if there's one thing, if you try and like sort of talk to your venue and be or make compromises that aren't right for your show at this point, you're kind of setting yourself up in a like slippery.
And when there's 300 plus venues and within them there's more than 1,000 different spaces in which shows take place, there is going to be the space for you. So don't just assume that is the right one. Make sure you do that research.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to rush in. Like it's the reason we're spending a lot of time on this topic is because it's probably up there with the most important decisions that you're going to make.
Yeah. Okay. And as you said earlier, it's the number one relationship that you develop in coming to the Fringe.
And that relationship will probably begin from the first inquiry email. So like just remember like the tone and your approach.
Be sound.
Yeah. It's all about like be someone that someone would like to work with for the next however many months.
So next up, another fun topic.
Budgeting.
Are you going to make me cover this one?
I always make you do the fun ones.
As ever, before we go into this, again, we will go into this in a lot more depth in a specific episode, which is our episode on how to budget your Fringe, which we're going to broadcast on Tuesday. I think it's a Tuesday the 10th of December, a little Christmas treat where we go through all the ins and outs of budgeting a show. But as a starting point, what do we say? What would we advise to people to think about?
Well, I would say, because we left this to the end of the last section, I'm going to point to the resources right now, so they're up front and centre. On the same part of the website, which is the Take Part section, there are budgeting tools. So there is a template, or a template budget that you can use and input all of your own figures, and it has it's essentially just an Excel spreadsheet that has all of the calculations already built into it.
Even it allows you to put in like what ticket money you get per it's really impressive. I was genuinely really impressed by it. It tells you like how many tickets you have to sell in order to do certain things.
So it'll be able to measure your income and your expenditure and let you know how much your Fringe, once you've put in all of the figures, and we'll touch briefly on those in a minute. The other thing is there's some sample budgets from previous years. Now, take all of these with a pinch of salt because every single budget will be completely different, and there is a huge amount of factors involved in what your budget will look like. For example, if you're putting on a one-man show and you're based in Edinburgh and you already have your accommodation sorted, it's not got any set, it's not got any tech requirements, your budget is going to be very different to a 10-person musical theatre piece that's coming from Canada that has a larger set and a huge amount of tech requirements.
And needs a grand piano.
And need that grand piano.
That grand piano.
Get them that grand piano.
If I had a venue, first thing, grand piano.
Oh, I know, immediately. So, be very clear on the differences in those costs. The samples that are up there are actually from shows that have come to the Fringe in the past. So they are accurate costs, but obviously they all depend on very, very different factors. And those factors can include you should always be thinking of your production costs. So what it is costing to make the show from scratch. If it's already made, great, but also think about any production repairs or remounting costs that you might have. That could be re-rehearsals, that could be adapting the set to make it more tourable, to make it easier to bring to Edinburgh. Also remembering that a lot of the time it's only a 15-minute get in and get out on either end of your show. So making sure that your set is adaptable and storable enough to be able to very quickly wheel in and out of the space that you're using, and being aware that some venues don't have storage, so you might not actually be able to use the set. So again, that comes back to your conversation with your venue.
It's also a very good one that you've highlighted of knowing the duration of your show is a really important one, because, and it links into budget. You will be fined by, I think, most venues if you go over your slot time. And being the person, one of the people at the front line when shows are registering, you would not believe how many people get confused between the slot time the venue have offered them and then the time their show has to be on. Those have to be different because the turnaround time for your show. So that's something to be really clear. It tends to be, I think the norm is like an hour slot, but it's really important to be like, okay, is my show 50 minutes? Is it 50? Is it 45? And checking out with your venue to make sure, as Katie says, you've got like get in time at the start and get out time.
Yeah.
Because the last thing a fringe budget needs added to it is fines for
Definitely.
And again, if you've
overrunning.
not been to the Fringe before, there are spaces in venues that are used from 10 a.m. in the morning till 3 a.m. at night, and if there's any delay, it impacts so many fellow artists.
Because you might be like, it was 10 minutes, and be like, if you're 10 minutes on the end of that 10 a.m. slot, that like if everyone does that, the
And
last
also-
show's not going on.
And people who come to the Fringe, many people see 6 or more shows a day, and they plan a regimented schedule. So if your show overruns, it could disrupt their entire day.
Yeah, totally.
So just make sure you
that
get
went down a,
get that
sorry,
sorted.
down a tangent.
Sorry, I killed your flow there, but I was like, we did not
Can
talk
I throw
about durations.
another random budget point, which is easy to overlook? Trying to understand with your venue the arrangements of VAT, which is the UK's equivalent of sales tax, which you may have in other countries. Just understanding where that sits, because it does apply to some shows in some venues, but not to others. So again, it's just one of those important questions to ask early on.
100%, and I'm not going to go any further into VAT because it has been the bane of my existence. I will say that, obviously there are some very clear costs in terms of your travel, your accommodation, your living costs.
Living costs are really...
It's really important because obviously you've got your day-to-day living costs, but it can be more expensive because you're at the Fringe and you're looking at travel to and from your venue if you are slightly further out, but your venue or your accommodation might be cheaper if you are further out. So, offsetting those costs, being very... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, things like when you're out and about, suddenly like you're having to eat out more because maybe you don't have time to go back to the venue. Little things like that start adding up.
Yeah, 100%. And, every single evening of the Fringe can become a networking event. So, being aware that there are costs associated with being out later, not being able to get home to eat. And, also tickets for shows.
Tickets.
A lot of the time you might not get a venue pass for it. So some venues might have free tickets for artists in their venues, but you might not get tickets for other venues or for specific shows that are sold out. So being clear on the kind of amount of money that you have to spend on tickets and not going over that budget and blowing it right at the very start.
Because actually, depending on your goals, seeing other work could be a huge factor in coming, meeting those other companies, and you don't want to be like, oh, I really wanted to see that, but I have nothing left in my budget. I know Daniel, actually, you're a member of our team. You have like a Fringe, like
a budget
that you start literally pay into, and so as in August, Daniel's like, do you want to go and see this show? And we're all like, we can't afford it. And Daniel's like, oh, I'm just living out of my Fringe budget that I've put aside.
That's good because Daniel saves money and fundraises throughout the year for his Fringe tickets. And there is a huge amount of fundraising that goes into bringing a show to the Fringe.
Sorry, I love the idea of Daniel holding a fundraiser to go and see Fringe shows. Please do that.
But yeah, so making sure that you know where your income is coming from and being very clear on your finances before bringing a show to the Fringe, because it's a huge expense to bring something here. There is going to be an episode on budgeting.
Yep. I've got to remember the date again. That's the 10th. That's the 10th of December, and we'll be bringing loads of members of the team in for that one to talk about various aspects of your budget, because there are so many technical details we couldn't cover it alone.
One last thing on budgeting, contingency. Make sure that you're putting a contingency factor in there. We usually recommend around 10 to 15% because the expect the unexpected is a huge part of bringing a show to the Fringe. And, if anything happens, having a little bit of a contingency cushion to hold on to is really, really important.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd throw in there, because it was sort of my area at Fringe, was the marketing and promotion of your show. Don't underestimate your budget for that. In terms of maybe you're going to hire a PR, maybe you're not going to do that, but maybe you're probably going to have flyers and posters. So when you're thinking about sustainability and your budget, how many of those do you actually need? Probably way less than you thought. If you have any concerns about that, you can email media@edfringe.com and one of the team will be able to help. But that's somewhere where you really want to make sure you've left budget for that. And the one place I would say is a really good place to spend money, even when your budget is really tight, is on your image. Getting some really great photography and images will put you in such a good stead from program onward.
It's the most cost-effective way of making your show stand out amongst 3,000 plus other shows. It won't surprise you to hear as well that when it comes to marketing and all those aspects of your show, we will have dedicated FringeCast episodes about them at some point in the new year. So look forward to them. It's great that we talked about running over time and running out over your slot. And we've got to wrap up fairly soon. So what do we have next?
So really, to bring all that together, it's registration is the sort of almost like the first stage for one part of your show, but almost the final stage for the getting ready, bringing your show to the Fringe. So registering isn't something that's compulsory. You don't have to register your show, but it's something that a lot of people do because you get a lot for it. Well, I think you get a lot for it. Registering with the Fringe Society will mean that your show is included in the printed programme if it's within the deadlines that we talked about earlier. So the 8th of April at 5 p.m. is the last time you can register and get into that programme. It also gets you onto our website, so tickets.edfringe.com, but also onto the Fringe app. You also get us, the services of the Fringe Society. Katie, do you want to talk a bit about Fringe Central?
Yeah, so the services of the Fringe Society that Alan is talking about essentially are the artist-facing support services that we've kind of touched a little bit on over the last episode. So you get your media advice service, so that's anything to do with helping you market your show and getting those bums on seats that we talked about, helping you with your press release and you're contacting the media, etc. We also have an artist development service, which is the service that I head up, and that helps you in your professional and creative development goals at the Fringe. So if you're looking to tour your show after the Fringe, if you're looking for a producer, an agent, if you're looking to become the next Fleabag, we can help you find those people that will get you to those stages and put you in touch with the right networks and contacts for that. We also have Fringe Central, which is our centre for artists at the Fringe, which is, yes, a building in itself and an entity, and where all of those teams that are artist-facing sit during the Fringe. But we also have over 100 professional development events within that building throughout the month of August that are completely free to artists that are registered with the Fringe Society. So it is a huge bonus that's involved in registering.
And it's worth going back to our history that we're a charity created by Fringe artists in the 50s, and it's those registration fees that keep us existing as a charity to support artists today and in the future.
And the last thing you get for that, if your show is ticketed, we will also sell your tickets for you, which, considering some venues won't have their own sort of box office system, that can be a huge part of coming to the Fringe. But also, linking back to budget, your tickets would have a commission on them sold through the Fringe box office. So that's an important thing to remember. I think it's 4% from memory. It comes off any ticket sold through the Fringe box office. So those kind of things are important research to do. And I guess all of that comes with your registration fee, which is the one time that the Fringe Society will ask you for money in the process. You can do paid for advertising, but the one time we'll ask you to pay anything is at your registration fee.
Unless you get a Fringe Friends membership, which is also a really great thing, which you should look up.
And also helps that ticketing budget.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting, I think, how these registration fees have been frozen for...
I think this is going into
12,
the
13th.
So it was 12 this year, so it's the 13th. We're going to the 13th year of frozen fees.
And we're trying to keep them as low as possible, but it covers our costs.
They're relate to how many performances of your show you're doing. So if you're doing a 1 or 2 performance run, that's £96. If you go between 3 and 5, that's a longer limited run, and that's £204. And then in anything of 6 performances or more, we class that as a full run, and that is £393.60. All of those include VAT, because we all love talking about VAT today. But that discount deadline we talked about earlier, which is if you can register your show, have everything confirmed by the 11th of March at 5 p.m, you get around £100 off. It comes down to £295
for
20.
your ticket budget.
Yay.
And guess what? We'll also be having a dedicated FringeCast all about the technicalities of registration and the various quirks of what constitutes a show, and whether how you can have a show existing in multiple venues. But if it's the same show, you pay once. But if you have multiple shows, they are registered separately. But we'll get into that in a separate episode, because time is definitely marching on.
The one final thing to say about registration is there's only one rule, and that's you have to have your venue contract in place. We won't let you register until you have your venue.
Because the last thing we want is to print a programme saying that you'll be in a space at 5 o'clock every day and the public go there and they can't find you.
So if you're thinking timeline in your head, venue sorted, then you can register.
Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes left. before we finish with today's episode?
Yeah, so if you get any questions, now is your time to get in while we're talking about this final thing. And it's kind of just like thinking ahead. So if this has been the practicalities of kind of firming up the fact you're doing a show and getting it all sorted so you're definitely bringing it, Katie, what do we also think about? What should you have at the back of your mind of, actually, these are things that need to get started probably sooner than I think if I want to make the most of my time at the Fringe?
I think you touched on marketing a little bit a while ago, and that is really important because it is that huge marketplace, and there's a huge amount of audience here, but there's also a huge amount of shows. So looking at what will make your show stand out, looking at what media outlets you should be speaking to, so starting that research now. The other thing, of course, I touched on earlier is thinking about your professional development goals. If it's something that it's a show that you want to tour after the Fringe, being very clear on how that could be possible, on if it's tourable, if it's got international appeal, what kind of venues or festivals or people you want to be speaking to about touring that show onwards. So very much thinking about who's going to be in the room when you're here in Edinburgh.
Yeah. I think as well, having, like we talked about timeline right at the start, getting, as well as you're doing your budget, if you do your own timeline of like, this is what we're going to sort when, and this is what member of our team, or especially if it's a solo show and it's just you doing everything, making sure you've got that clear and it can be spread out is really nice, because if you do work when you think you're going to be maybe a little bit quieter in April or May, say, it's going to take the pressure off July, August, where suddenly nerves and anxieties all come in about actually doing a show.
Yeah, definitely. And the earlier you start having those conversations, the better. I will say that there is also a time when it's too early to start having those conversations. So I think generally looking at those kind of things from once you've registered, March onwards probably is a good place to start thinking about those.
And I would say I've got one more that it's kind of like top tip, just because I think it's kind of with my marketing head on, but being able to pitch your show, being able to have that elevator pitch, knowing what your show is and why you're doing it. So I guess it again goes back to your goals. That's going to help you when you're choosing a venue, because you might be pitching to that venue. It's going to help when you register, because you're going to need things like copy, but also like it's just going to having that really grounded, because the Fringe is stressful, and when you get to the point where you're like, I'm forgetting why I'm even doing this, like having that pitch and knowing this is what it is and this is why it's great.
Great.
The reason I was looking at you for time is we had one question come through, but I'll try and tackle it myself to do it quickly. But do feel free to pitch in. So L. Johnson just asked, do we offer any help with accommodation? So if you go to our website to the Take Part section, on that menu is a button that just says accommodation, and on that we have an accommodation portal that lists a selection of affordable accommodation, both staying with hosts and staying in university rooms. That is updated as time goes by. It is still quite early, but there will be more going on there. And then more broadly, there are hundreds of options for accommodation in the city, but if you're not sure about anything, just feel free to get in touch with us. I'll be happy to help. But there is a dedicated portal in which we'll be adding more affordable options in the coming weeks and months.
Great.
So
good. Yeah, you answered it.
You answered that very well.
So that's it for today's episode. So all that's left really is to look ahead at some future episodes. We had trailed a lot of them as we went along, but just so you have them all in one place, what is the next episode, Alan?
It's going to be looking into what venues are looking for and how to find one. That's on the 19th of November at 5 o'clock British Standard Time. Is that right?
That's
no,
not
GMT.
It's GMT.
Just say UK time.
UK time.
And then following that, what's the next episode, Katie?
It is performing at the Fringe from overseas, which is on the 3rd of December, and that will be looking at all of the intricacies of taking part as an international artist.
And then our final episode of 2019.
What's that, Daniel?
Is how to budget your Fringe show, that Christmas treat at 5 o'clock UK time on the 10th of December. And once again, as we said, all this information, all these episodes and details about those in-person sessions in London, Edinburgh, New York can be found at edfringe.com/FringeCast.
Yeah, for just because I want to fit in a wee plug. Anyone is in London on November the 23rd at 2 o'clock. It's a Saturday afternoon. Some of the team will be down there. Some of the venues will be down there as well. And it's a bit of a how to bring a show to the Fringe, and also a chance to meet the venues and sort of put some faces to emails.
Will you be there?
I'm not there.
Oh,
I really want to go to London. Yeah.
That's sad.
Katie and I get let loose in April.
Oh yeah, we'll be there in April. Come see us.
Your fair weather Fringe members of the team. So that's it for future episodes. The only other thing, if it's the first time you listen to us, there are a number of different ways you can keep in touch with us. So on social media, on Twitter and Instagram, Katie.
He loves plugging that social.
On Twitter and Instagram, we have @EdFringe, and for a more specific artist-focused channel, we have @Fringe Central.
If you want to find out more, we've mentioned it hundreds of times today. Any more details about taking part in the Fringe? Unsurprisingly, it's edfringe.com/take-part. But if you just Google take part of the Fringe, you'll probably get there too.
And then we've built it as a bit of a magic email address, but participants @edfringe.com generally goes to a team who their whole job is understanding all of these intricacies that we've been talking about and are very good at triaging if it's not theirs. I also want to add just one other email into that, which is FringeCast@edfringe.com. And that's basically because these exist for you, the artists, and we want them to be relevant to you. So generally any like feedback you have, but also like if there's like an idea of a topic that you think would be good for us to focus on, all of that's really important. So we'd love to hear from you.
To wrap up today, because we haven't heard from them already, we have a little video clip or a sound clip from an artist we spoke to.
Yes, it's one of the. Sorry, I was also meant to cut to that. And it's actually probably a really nice way for us to finish. This is Eleanor, who we spoke to at Fringe Central, who had her show run at the Fringe this year.
And it was her first ever Fringe.
Yeah, it was called In Pursuit. And she talked to us, and the clip you're going to hear is basically her talking about us, because she hadn't known about the ways we could help before deciding to do the Fringe. So this is Eleanor talking about like how the Fringe Society helped her.
So we'll leave you in the company of Eleanor, but just from us today, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to speak to you soon for our next episode. We'll be talking all about what venues are looking for and how to find them.
See you then.
See ya.
Bye.
Massively helped. Really, really. I didn't expect it to be so friendly. I thought it was like, you're doing Edinburgh and it's scary, but it's like, no, we're here to help you. And the only people to kind of be scared of is possibly the reviewers. I'm trying to, but even then it's like they're doing their job and they can really help. But yeah, I didn't expect the family aspect of it.